In this Diablo 2 Resurrected video, we're going to be talking about classes and how each of them play. The game features 7 different classes, and if you're still trying to figure out what to play, then this video is for you. The first thing that you'll need to do when you start the game is decide which class you'll be playing. If you're a newcomer, I strongly recommend that you pick a class based on your liking and not based on a build guide. The reason for this is that most builds heavily rely on powerful items that you will likely not be able to get for at least the first 50 to 100 hours. This means you'll end up struggling as you progress through the game, resulting in a frustrating experience. Instead, you should start playing a class that is appealing to you and learn about the game as you progress through the different acts and difficulties. This will give you a better grasp of the mechanics, allowing you to define your own playstyle, at which point you'll be better suited to search for a build and devote to it. Also remember that you'll get 1 free respec for completing the very first quest of the game, Den of Evil, so if you're not enjoying your experience, you might want to use this respec and try a different option or skill tree. With the right build, all classes become very strong during endgame, but each of them has a very unique playstyle. We'll be publishing individual videos and builds for each class near release, but I wanted to give you a basic overview of each of them in case you're still on the fence regarding which to choose. The Sorceress is one of the most popular classes of Diablo 2 because of her high damage output and relatively easy mechanics. She can use fire, ice, and lightning spells and has access to one of the best abilities in the game called Teleport, which allows you to quickly move through the map or escape from danger. She has a very low health pool, which means that you'll need to keep away from enemies to stay alive. Another downside of the Sorceress is that she can struggle with some elemental immune enemies, as you'll often devote to a single element type. The Sorceress skill tree is divided between 3 different elemental affinities, cold, fire, and lightning spells. Most spells of the cold spell tree will slow down your enemies or freeze them, providing you much better control of the battlefield. The individual damage of most spells is not that impressive, but it is compensated for by their AoE, providing the ability to kill many enemies at the same time. The fire spell tree has very high damage to both groups and individual targets. While the destructive force of this tree is unparalleled, it relies on killing your enemies quickly as the only means of protecting yourself. Some fire spells leave fire patches on the ground that deal damage over time and are best used in closed spaces. Lightning spells are unique as they have a huge gap between their min and max damage, meaning that you might one-shot an enemy on the first strike, or do almost no damage at all after several casts. This is often compensated for by investing in cast speed rather than damage, as quickly spamming lightning spells will increase the chances of you casting a high damage version. Additionally, Static Field and Teleport are 2 spells that can be found in this tree but are used by every Sorceress build because of their convenience. While playing the Sorceress, rely on powerful spells to defeat your enemies from a safe location. Most of her spells deal very high damage on their own, which makes her less reliant on gear than all other classes. Using her teleport skill, the Sorceress can quickly reach her desired destination, allowing her to complete runs much faster than other characters during early game. This is very important in game progression and the main reason why she is picked by newcomers and during ladder resets. Here are some examples of Sorceress builds. The Amazon uses projectile weapons to deal massive damage to enemies from a safe distance. She has an average health pool, and her passive skills provide her with a chance to avoid damage both while running or attacking enemies. The Amazon skill tree is divided between bow and crossbow skills, passive and magical skills, and javelin and spear skills. It's highly advisable to focus on either the bow and crossbow tree or the javelin and spear tree, and then assign points into passive and magical skills as required. Most people opt for bows when selecting the bow and crossbow skill tree because of their increased attack speed and overall better unique bows. This tree is very versatile and excels at dealing with multiple enemies at the same time, providing you with many types of elemental attacks. While the passive and magic skill tree doesn't have a playstyle on its own, it greatly increases both your offensive and defensive capabilities by providing passive bonuses. On top of that, the Valkyrie skill unlocked at level 30 is a better version of the Mercenary, which you can freely cast on the battlefield. Most people who opt for the Javelin and Spear skill tree will opt to go for Javelins instead of Spears because of their insane damage output and the ability to attack from a distance when needed. Javelin Amazons deal some of the highest damage between all classes, but their throw speed is low, so you'll need to make each shot count. Additionally, the tree mostly focuses on lightning and poison attacks, which limits your engagement options. While playing the Amazon, you'll kite enemies by taking a couple of shots, running away, and then repeating this sequence. Here are a couple examples of possible Amazon builds. Paladins use defensive and offensive auras to buff both themselves and allies on the battlefield. They are very tanky due to their Holy Shield ability and defensive auras, but without enough gear they can fall behind in damage compared to other classes. It's worth mentioning that this downside is only noticeable during early gameplay, as fully equipped Paladins are one of the highest DPS classes in the game. The Paladin skill tree is divided into combat skills, defensive auras, and offensive auras. Both defensive and offensive auras can only be equipped on the secondary skill slot, so you'll need to swap between them in battle according to the situation. Combat skills are designed to deal damage to enemies. Most Paladin builds are created around one particular combat skill and then supported by different auras. The only exception here is Holy Shield, which is used by most builds and provides a buff to your shield, greatly increasing your defensive capabilities. Defensive auras can greatly increase your survival chances by, for example, increasing your elemental resistances or defensive values. Some of them can also be used as utility auras, increasing movement speed or the mana recovery rate of you or your group. Offensive auras increase your offensive capabilities by either buffing your party members, debuffing enemies, or by dealing direct damage. The offensive auras that you use highly depend on the type of combat skill that you are currently using. While playing Paladin, you'll focus on either the Blessed Hammer skill tree or in melee combat for your build. Paladins are heavily reliant on their equipment to increase their damage, but their survivability is very high thanks to your defensive auras. During early gameplay, it might take you longer than other classes to clear each room, but you'll become more powerful as you acquire more gear. Here are some examples of Paladin builds. The Necromancer can summon minions to fight alongside him against the forces of evil. He can use curses to debilitate enemies, turning the tide of battle in his favor, and has access to ranged spells to attack on his own. The Necromancer skill tree is divided between summoning spells, poison and bone spells, and curses. The summoning skill tree focuses on summoning allies that fight for you. Skeletons can be raised from corpses, and the total amount that you can control at the same time will increase with each point assigned. Additionally, you can increase their power by spending points in Skeletal Mastery. Golems are also a different type of summon that you can only have one active of any type at the same time. The Curse skill tree allows you to aid your forces by throwing curses into your enemies. Curses are thrown into an area and apply massive debuffs such as reducing armor or dealing damage to enemies in the AoE. The Poison and Bone spells skill tree is mainly composed of direct spells to deal damage on your own. It's important to remember that you'll need corpses to create your army, so you'll want to be strong enough to take out some enemies to start raising your army. While playing the Necromancer, you'll command an army of skeletons and monsters that perform the hack and slash for you. While your forces fight on the vanguard, you'll curse your enemies to weaken them and explode their corpses to deal area damage. It's important to notice that playing as a Necromancer might be frustrating at times, especially when you die, as it requires some preparation. You'll need corpses to raise your army, and killing enemies on your own might be difficult if you assigned all points into summoning skills. Here are a couple examples of Necromancer builds. Barbarians are very tanky and fight enemies face to face. They have access to shouts which act as buffs that affects both themselves and party members, greatly increasing both defensive and offensive capabilities for long periods of time. Barbarians are the only class that can wield two weapons at the same time, with the exception of the assassin using katars, and their combat masteries allow them to increase the affinity with every type of weapon, opening up the possibility to numerous and very distinct builds for both PvP and PvE. The Barbarian skill tree is divided between combat skills, combat masteries, and war cries. Combat skills are mainly active attack skills. Similar to Paladins, most Barbarian builds are created around a combat skill. Most combat skills are designed to deal damage to a single enemy, so most Barbarians rely on the Whirlwind ability to attack multiple enemies at once. Combat masteries are all passive effects. There's a skill mastery for each type of weapon, greatly increasing their effectiveness. There are also some passive defensive skills that increase your defense and speed. War cries can be used to provide a buff to all members of the party for a long period of time. Multiple shouts can be active at the same time, allowing the Barbarian to greatly increase everyone's defense and attack values. While playing the Barbarian, you'll run across the battlefield dealing very high damage to individual targets. The Barbarian is the most item-dependent class in the game, and for the same reason it is also considered the hardest class to start with in the game. Here are some good examples of Barbarian builds. Druids use the power of nature to fight against the forces of evil. They are sort of jack-of-all-trades, combining the ability to summon companions, transform into beasts to fight up close, and use magical abilities to fight from a safe distance. While they have access to a wide range of abilities, you'll need to focus on a specific category to effectively pass through the endgame. The Druid skill tree is divided between elemental skills, shapeshifting skills, and summoning skills. The elemental skill tree is mostly consisted of spells that deal direct damage to enemies. Most of these spells can deal cold and fire damage, but some like Tornado deal physical damage as well. Shapeshifting skills allow the Druid to transform into either a werewolf or a werebear. Most abilities in this tree can only be used while the Druid is transformed, so it's best to focus on a single transformation. Similar to the Necromancer, the summoning skills a Druid possesses allow them to summon allies to fight for him. Different summons can be active at the same time, and some of them provide passive abilities for all party members. When playing with the Druid, your gameplay experience will greatly depend on the build you went for. Here are some examples of Druid builds. Assassins use martial arts and traps to defeat her enemies. Traps can be laid on the ground and will periodically attack enemies within range, while martial arts allow her to perform very quick attacks. The Assassin skill tree is divided between martial arts, traps, and shadow discipline skills. Martial arts skills are divided into charge-up skills, which accumulate effects and damage on each successful hit, and finishing moves, which release those charges and effects, allowing you to create a devastating combo. Trap skills can be laid on the ground and will periodically attack enemies when they are in range. Most traps deal elemental damage, and their attack pattern is unique to each of them. The Shadow Disciplines tree combines passive and active buffs to greatly enhance both your defensive and offensive capabilities. Additionally, the Shadow Summon can be of great help to distract enemies and to increase your spell spam. While martial arts sound great on paper, they do not perform that well on the battlefield, so you'll most likely end up using traps and Shadow Discipline skills to enhance yourself. There are two main types of traps, being fire traps and lightning traps. Fire traps are better at dealing with groups of enemies because of their V-shaped pattern, while lightning traps deal higher damage in a straight line. Here are some examples of assassin builds. I hope this video has helped you select a class, and just remember there is really no wrong choice here, and I encourage you to make multiple characters with many different classes so you can experience them all. Stay tuned for our build guides for Diablo 2 Resurrected as we publish many different builds for this iconic game. And be sure to check out the Diablo 2 Resurrected wiki if you need a reference for rune words, other information, or more build ideas.